Imagine being the most powerful man in the world. You rule an empire that stretches from India to Ethiopia. Millions of people bow before you. Your word is absolute law. You can have anything you want, anyone you want. There are no limits to your power, no boundaries to your desires. Now imagine that power corrupting you so completely that you destroy your own family, starting with an affair with your own niece. This is the true story of Xerxes the Great, king of kings of the Persian Empire, and what he did to the women of his own household. It's a story that ancient historians whispered about with horror. A story of obsession, betrayal, mutilation, and murder that tore apart the Persian royal family and helped trigger the decline of one of history's greatest empires. 480 BCE. After his devastating defeat in Greece at the Battle of Salamis, Xerxes returns to his palace at Susa, humiliated and looking for distraction. He should be planning his next military campaign. Instead, he becomes obsessed with a woman he cannot have, his own brother's wife. When she refuses him, he hatches a plan that will destroy everyone involved. He arranges a marriage between his son and his niece, his brother's daughter, to get closer to the woman he desires. But then something even darker happens. Xerxes changes his mind and seduces his own niece instead. The girl he brought into his palace to marry his son becomes his secret mistress. And when the affair is discovered, the revenge that follows is so brutal, so horrifying, that it shocks even by ancient standards. Xerxes' wife doesn't punish the young mistress. She punishes her mother, mutilating her in ways too graphic to fully describe. Breast cut off. Nose, lips, ears, and tongue severed. The woman left alive but destroyed, a living warning of what happens when you cross the Queen of Persia. But it doesn't end there. Xerxes' brother, devastated by what happened to his wife, attempts to start a rebellion. Xerxes responds by having his own brother hunted down and executed, along with his 3 sons, Xerxes' own nephews. This is what absolute power looks like when it has no limits. This is what happens when a man believes he's above the laws that govern ordinary humans, even the most basic taboo against harming your own family. If you want to hear the forgotten truths of history, the dark secrets of ancient empires, the human darkness that lurks behind the marble statues and golden thrones, then subscribe right now. Because what Xerxes did to his own family reveals something terrifying about power, desire, and the complete corruption that comes when one person has too much of both. Let's go back to where it all began. To understand how Xerxes could do something this monstrous, you need to understand what kind of man he was, and what kind of world he lived in. Xerxes was born around 518 BCE, the son of Darius the Great, one of Persia's most successful emperors. But Xerxes wasn't supposed to be king. He had an older half-brother, Artabazanes, who was born first. By normal rules of succession, the throne should have gone to him. But Xerxes had something his brother didn't, the right mother. His mother was Atassa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire. She was royal blood. She was power. And she made sure her son inherited the throne instead of his older brother. From birth, Xerxes was taught that he was special. That normal rules didn't apply to him. That he was chosen by the gods to rule over lesser men. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus describes Persian royal education as intensive and focused on creating warriors who feared nothing, because fear for a Persian is the equivalent of slavery. At age 7, Xerxes learned to ride horses and hunt. At 14 he began studying how to rule. He was taught to be wise, just, prudent, and brave. But here's the problem with absolute monarchy. When you teach someone that they're divinely ordained to rule, that their will is law, that they answer to no one, you create a monster waiting to happen. When Darius died in 486 BCE, Xerxes became king of kings. He inherited an empire of unprecedented size and wealth. He had multiple wives and concubines, as was common for Persian rulers. His chief wife was a mistress, a woman described by Greek historians as powerful, intelligent, and absolutely ruthless. Xerxes spent his early reign crushing rebellions in Egypt and Babylon. He was brutal, far more so than his father. Where Darius had been strategic and diplomatic, Xerxes was harsh and unforgiving. He wanted people to fear him, to know that defiance meant death. Then came Greece. Xerxes assembled the largest army the world had ever seen. Ancient sources claim over 2 million men, though modern estimates put it closer to 360,000, still massive for the ancient world. He was going to finish what his father started and bring the Greeks to their knees. But he failed. Catastrophically. At Thermopylae, a tiny force of Spartans held off his entire army for 3 days, becoming legends in the process. At Salamis, the Greek navy destroyed his fleet in one of the most decisive naval battles in history. Xerxes himself watched from a throne on the shore as his ships burned and sank. He returned to Persia defeated, humiliated, his confidence shattered. The man who believed he was chosen by the gods had been beaten by a handful of Greek city-states. The emperor who thought himself invincible had been proven mortal. And that's when the darkness truly began. Picture this, you're in your mid-40s. You've just suffered the greatest humiliation of your life. You're supposed to be planning your revenge, but all you can think about is escaping. Escaping the pressure, the judgment, the failure. You're the most powerful man in the world and you feel powerless. So you turn to what powerful men have always turned to when they feel this way. You lose yourself in pleasure, in distractions, in desires that get darker and darker because nothing else makes you feel in control anymore. Xerxes began spending more time in his palaces at Susa and Persepolis. Less time governing. Less time strategizing. More time in what the Greeks called harem intrigues. The sexual politics of the royal household, where wives, concubines, and family members all competed for the king's attention and favor. And that's when he saw her. His brother Mizist's wife. We don't know her name, history didn't record it, but Herodotus tells us she was beautiful, intelligent, and loyal to her husband. Xerxes wanted her. And when you're the king of kings, you're not used to being told no. What do you think happens when absolute power meets absolute desire? When a man who believes he's above all laws encounters the one thing he can't have. Here's where the horror begins. Xerxes makes his move. According to Herodotus, after the Greek defeat and during the army's retreat to Sardis, Xerxes tried repeatedly to seduce his brother's wife. He used every tactic available to a king. Gifts, promises, flattery, pressure. She refused him. Every single time. Think about the courage that took. This is the King of Kings, a man who can order your execution with a word, and this woman, whose name we don't even know, said no. She remained faithful to her husband, Xerxes' own brother Mizist. But Xerxes doesn't give up. He's obsessed. And when direct seduction fails, he becomes devious. He hatches a plan that's as clever as it is twisted. Xerxes has a son named Darius, the crown prince. And Mizist has a daughter named Artaint, Xerxes' niece. Xerxes arranges a marriage between them, his son to his niece. Royal intermarriage was common in Persian culture, a way to keep power within the family. But Xerxes' real goal isn't the marriage. It's proximity. By bringing Artaint into the royal household as his son's bride, he ensures that his brother's family, including the woman he desires, will be constantly present at court. He can see her more often. He can continue his pursuit. The wedding is celebrated at Sardis with great fanfare. But then, something unexpected happens. Something that makes the situation infinitely worse. Xerxes changes his mind about which woman he wants. The mother had refused him. But the daughter, young, beautiful, newly married to his son, living in his palace, the daughter is more accessible, more vulnerable, more easily manipulated. Xerxes begins an affair with Artaint, his own niece, his son's wife. A girl young enough to be intimidated by the King of Kings into accepting his advances. For a while it remains secret. But then Artaint makes a fatal mistake. During one of their encounters, Xerxes is wearing a beautiful robe, an elaborate, distinctive garment that his wife Amestris had personally woven for him. It was more than clothing. It was a symbol of their marriage, of her devotion, of her position as queen. Xerxes, in the throes of passion or perhaps feeling generous, offers to give Artaint anything she wants. This was a common royal custom, extravagant promises made in the heat of the moment. Artaint asks for the robe. Xerxes panics. He knows what this means. He tries to offer her anything else, gold, jewels, land, entire provinces. But he's made a promise and Artaint insists. Perhaps she doesn't fully understand the consequences. Perhaps she wants to provoke his wife. Perhaps she's just young and foolish. Whatever her reasoning, Xerxes gives her the robe. And Artaint, in what has to be one of the most spectacularly bad decisions in ancient history, wears it in public. Amestris sees it. She recognizes her own handiwork. She knows immediately what it means. Her husband has given away her personal gift, the symbol of their bond, to his mistress. Now, you might expect a mistress to confront her husband or to punish the young mistress. But she doesn't. Because a mistress isn't just angry, she's strategic. And she understands the real threat. Artaint is young and can be replaced. But if Xerxes is pursuing women from his brother's family, if Mizist's household has gained this kind of influence over the king, that's a political problem. That threatens her son's succession. That threatens everything. So a mistress waits. She waits for the annual royal banquet called Tukta, a sacred occasion where the king, by custom, must grant any request made to him. It's similar to the promise Xerxes made to Artaint, an oath that cannot be broken. During the banquet, in front of the entire court, a mistress makes her request. She wants Mizist's wife, Artaint's mother, the woman who had rejected Xerxes, delivered to her. Xerxes realizes immediately what his wife intends. He begs her to ask for anything else. He offers her cities, armies, treasures. But a mistress refuses. She wants the woman, and by the laws of Tukta, she has the right to her request. Xerxes gives in. He hands over his brother's wife to his own wife, knowing exactly what will happen. What a mistress does next is so brutal that even ancient historians, who witnessed and described countless atrocities, wrote about it with horror. She doesn't kill the woman. Death would be mercy. Instead, she has her guards mutilate her. They cut off her breasts. They slice off her nose, her ears, her lips, her tongue. They leave her alive, disfigured beyond recognition, a living warning. When Mizist discovers what has been done to his wife, he's devastated and enraged. He flees toward Bactria, the province he governs, intending to raise an army and rebel against his own brother. Xerxes sends soldiers after him. They catch Mizist and execute him along with his 3 sons, Xerxes' own nephews. An entire branch of the family tree cut down. And Artaint? Her fate is unclear. Some sources suggest she was killed. Others say she was sent away. But one thing is certain. The girl who asked for a robe destroyed her entire family. Drop a comment right now. Was Xerxes a monster, or was he just a man corrupted by absolute power? Where do you draw the line between the two? I want to hear what you think. The massacre of Mizist's family wasn't the end of Xerxes' downfall. It was the beginning of the end. After destroying his own brother and nephews, after allowing his wife to mutilate an innocent woman, Xerxes' reputation within his own court began to crumble. The nobles who had once revered him as king of kings now saw him as a man ruled by his passions, controlled by his wives, and willing to destroy family bonds for the sake of his desires. The Greek historians who recorded these events, particularly Herodotus, used the story as proof that Xerxes was everything they believed Eastern rulers to be: despotic, effeminate by their standards, ruled by women, and morally corrupt. Whether or not their interpretation was fair, the story became legendary proof that absolute power corrupts absolutely. But here's what's fascinating. Modern historians debate whether this story is even entirely true. The account comes primarily from Herodotus, who wrote decades after these events and who had a clear agenda, making the Persians look barbaric to glorify Greek victory. Some scholars argue the story is embellished or even invented to explain a political crisis that actually had different causes. Yet even if the details are exaggerated, the core historical facts seem solid. There was a conflict between Xerxes and his brother Mizist. Mizist did attempt to rebel. Xerxes did have him executed along with his sons. Something caused this fraternal breakdown, and ancient sources consistently point to a scandal involving women of the royal household. What we know for certain is this: after the Greek campaigns and the family disasters, Xerxes' reign changed. He became less focused on military conquest and more focused on building projects. He expanded the palace complex at Persepolis, creating some of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world. The famous Gate of All Nations, the Apollon Palace, the Harem building, all of these were Xerxes' projects. Some historians interpret this as Xerxes retreating from politics into luxury and decadence after his defeats. Others see it as a strategic shift. Perhaps he realized military expansion had reached its limits and turned to consolidating power through impressive architecture and cultural projects. But the damage to his family was permanent. His relationship with his queen, a mistress, became one of the most notorious in ancient history. She's described in sources as continuing to take brutal revenge on anyone she perceived as threatening her or her sons. After Xerxes' death, she remained a power behind the throne during the reign of their son Artaxerxes I, still ordering executions and mutilations into her old age. The affair and its aftermath became a cautionary tale that echoed through Persian history. It appeared in royal inscriptions, in oral histories, in the cultural memory of what happens when a ruler loses control, not over his empire but over himself. And then, in 465 BCE, came the final act of Xerxes' tragedy. He was assassinated in his own bedchamber by Artabanus, the commander of his royal guard, possibly with help from a palace eunuch. The details are murky, different ancient sources give different accounts, but it appears Artabanus then tried to frame one of Xerxes' sons for the murder and seize power. Was the assassination connected to the family scandals years earlier? We can't know for sure. But we do know that Xerxes died violently, killed by men he trusted, in the very palace where he'd once felt invincible. His son Artaxerxes eventually took the throne and had Artabanus executed. But the damage was done. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Persian monarchy since Cyrus the Great was shattered. The empire would continue for another 130 years, but it would never again reach the heights of power it had achieved under Darius. Historians point to several factors in Persian decline: the expensive Greek wars, the drain on resources, the growing power of provincial governors. But they also point to something less tangible, a moral and political crisis at the heart of the empire, embodied by stories like Xerxes and his family. Hit that like button if this story showed you a side of ancient history they don't teach in school. Share it with someone who thinks ancient rulers were just names and dates. Because Xerxes was a real person who made real choices, and those choices destroyed real people, including his own family. So what does a 2,500-year-old story about a Persian king destroying his family have to do with you? Everything. Because this isn't really a story about ancient Persia. It's a story about what happens when desire meets power, when boundaries disappear, and when someone convinces themselves that normal rules don't apply to them. Strip away the ancient setting and what you have is startlingly modern. A powerful man who becomes obsessed with someone he can't have. Who abuses his position to get close to her. Who, when rejected, shifts his attention to someone younger and more vulnerable. Someone in his own family. Who destroys multiple lives through his actions, including his own brothers. Sound familiar? How many news stories have you read that follow this exact pattern? How many powerful men, CEOs, politicians, celebrities, religious leaders, have we watched fall from grace because they believed their power exempted them from basic human decency? The details change. The context shifts. But the pattern remains constant throughout history. People with unchecked power inevitably abuse it, especially in their personal lives, especially regarding sex and control, and especially in ways that destroy the vulnerable people around them. Xerxes convinced himself that his desires were more important than his family bonds, than his brother's marriage, than his niece's well-being. He convinced himself that being king of kings meant he could have anyone, do anything without consequences. But here's what he learned and what every powerful person eventually learns: there are always consequences. Maybe not immediate, maybe not obvious, but they come. His obsession destroyed his brother. It destroyed his nieces and nephews. It damaged his relationship with his wife and sons. It weakened his court and created the conditions for his own assassination. His dynasty would never fully recover. And here's the lesson for you: even if you're not a king, boundaries exist for a reason. They're not just arbitrary rules designed to constrain you. They're protection, for you and for everyone around you. The boundary against pursuing your brother's wife or daughter. That's not just a rule. That's protection for family bonds that, once broken, can never be fully repaired. The boundary against using your position of power to coerce someone into a relationship? That's not just political correctness. That's recognizing that consent requires equality, and when there's a massive power differential, real consent becomes impossible. The boundary against believing that you're special, that normal rules don't apply to you? That's the most important one of all. Because the moment you start believing you're above the rules, you've taken the first step toward becoming a monster. Xerxes wasn't born evil. He was raised in a system that told him he was special, chosen, above ordinary humans. And that message, repeated enough times to someone with enough power, turned him into someone capable of destroying his own family. Look at your own life. Where do you have power over others? Maybe you're a manager, a parent, a teacher, an older sibling. Maybe you have wealth, physical strength, or social status that gives you advantages. Are you using that power responsibly? Or are you, like Xerxes, starting to believe that your desires, your convenience, your gratification matters more than other people's boundaries, dignity, or well-being? The distance between a good person and a monster isn't as far as you think. It's measured in small decisions, in boundaries crossed, in moments when you choose what you want over what's right. Xerxes crossed those boundaries, and it destroyed him, his family, and eventually his empire. Don't make his mistake. The rules apply to you too. Especially to you. Especially when you're powerful. Xerxes' family tragedy is one of the darkest stories from ancient Persia, but it's far from the only tale of royal families destroyed by power, desire, and betrayal. Next time, we're going even deeper into the dark side of ancient dynasties. We're talking about Cleopatra, but not the romantic version you saw in movies. We're talking about the real Cleopatra, who murdered her own siblings to secure power, who used sex as a political weapon with cold calculation, and whose family was so inbred and dysfunctional that it makes Xerxes' household look tame by comparison. The Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt practiced brother-sister marriage for generations, creating a family tree that looks more like a family wreath. Murder, betrayal, incest, and political intrigue were just Tuesday in Alexandria. And Cleopatra? She was the ultimate survivor of this system, until she wasn't. We're going to examine the murders, the marriages, the manipulation, and the final collapse of a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries. And we're going to ask the question, was Cleopatra a feminist icon, or a ruthless operator who happened to be female? But if you don't subscribe right now, you might miss it. These stories, the real stories, the dark truths behind the myths, they need to be told. History isn't just heroes and villains. It's humans making human choices, often terrible ones with real consequences. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because power corrupts, and the stories of that corruption are written in blood across every page of human history. I'll see you in the next one. Don't let these truths stay buried.